Have you ever felt the earth move beneath your feet? Not in the way of earthquakes or tremors, but something more deliberate, more purposeful. I have, and what I witnessed in the autumn of 1850 still visits me in those dark hours before dawn, when the world feels thin and the dead seem closest to the living. My name is Cornelius Blackwood, and I was, in those days, what you might call a traveling physician. The kind that rode from town to town with a leather bag of instruments and tonics, bringing what little medical knowledge existed then to the scattered settlements of rural Georgia. It was a lonely profession, but it suited my temperament. Or so I thought before I received the letter that would lead me to the Darrow plantation. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a Negro boy who wouldn't meet my eyes and left before I could offer him water. The paper was expensive, cream-colored, but marred by what looked like dirt smudges, or perhaps something darker. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, as if penned by someone fighting against their own trembling hand. Dr. Blackwood, it read, we have heard of your reputation for discretion in matters both medical and unusual. The Darrow family requires your immediate assistance at Willow Grove Plantation, 3 days' ride south of Savannah. The matter is of utmost urgency and delicacy. We are prepared to compensate you handsomely, triple your usual rate, but you must come alone and speak to no one of this summons. Time is of the essence. The earth grows restless. That last line should have warned me. The earth grows restless. But the promise of triple pay clouded my judgment, and within the hour, I had packed my supplies and saddled my horse. The journey to Willow Grove took me through increasingly desolate country. The further I traveled from Savannah, the more the landscape seemed to change. Not just in its geography, but in its very character. The trees grew twisted, their branches reaching across the road like grasping fingers. Spanish moss hung so thick it blocked out the sun in places, creating tunnels of perpetual twilight even at midday. On the second night, I stayed at a way station run by an old couple who grew silent when I mentioned my destination. The woman crossed herself and muttered something in French I couldn't quite catch. Her husband simply shook his head and said, "That family should have left that land alone. Some ground ain't meant to be turned." I pressed him for more information, but he refused to elaborate, retiring early and leaving me alone in the common room with only a dying fire for company. That night, I dreamed of hands pushing up through soil, of mouths full of dirt trying to speak, of graves that breathed like living things. The third day brought me to the borders of the Darrow estate. I knew I was close when the very quality of the air seemed to change. It grew heavier, pressing against my skin like wet wool. My horse grew skittish, dancing sideways and rolling his eyes at shadows. The road was well maintained but utterly deserted. I saw no field hands, no overseers, no signs of the bustling activity one would expect from a working plantation. The main house appeared through the trees like something from a fever dream. Willow Grove was massive, a Greek revival mansion that should have been beautiful but instead filled me with an inexplicable dread. The white columns were stained with what looked like rust or dried blood. The windows, dozens of them, reflected the late afternoon sun like dead eyes. And the grounds, Christ, the grounds. The earth around the house was wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. While the rest of the property was overgrown and wild, perfect circles of bare earth dotted the landscape around the mansion. 7 of them, each about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. The size and shape of graves, but the soil within them was freshly turned, dark and rich, as if something had recently been digging, or trying to dig its way out. As I approached the main entrance, the front door opened before I could knock. A tall, gaunt man in a butler's uniform stood in the doorway. His face was the color of old parchment, and his eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, but they burned with fever. "Dr. Blackwood," he said, and his voice was like autumn leaves scraping across stone. "The family has been expecting you. Please come quickly. The situation has deteriorated since we sent the letter." I followed him into the house, and the moment I crossed that threshold, I felt it. A vibration in the air, in the floor, in my very bones. As if something massive was moving far beneath us, shifting in its sleep, or trying to wake up. The butler led me through hallways lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to track our movement. The faces in those paintings all shared the same sharp features, the same pale complexion, the same disturbing intensity in their gaze. The Darrow lineage stretching back generations. But there was something else in those faces, something that made my skin crawl. A hunger that seemed almost cannibalistic. "How many in the family?" I asked, trying to maintain professional composure. "7," the butler replied without turning. "There have always been 7. The butler, who introduced himself as Matthias, led me to what had once been the music room but had been converted into a makeshift hospital ward. The smell hit me first. Not the usual sickness smell of fever and waste, but something earthier, like freshly turned grave soil mixed with something sweet and corrupt. 7 beds were arranged in a perfect circle, and in each bed lay a member of the Darrow family. I had seen many illnesses in my years of practice, but nothing like this. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, with dark veins visible beneath like root systems. Their fingernails had grown long and thick, caked with dirt. But it was their eyes that disturbed me most. Wide open, unblinking, pupils dilated so large the iris was barely visible. They stared at the ceiling, all 7 of them, their chests rising and falling in perfect unison. "When did this begin?" I asked, approaching the nearest patient, a woman who appeared to be in her 30s. "3 weeks ago," Matthias replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "It started with Master Josiah, the eldest. He complained of dreams, terrible dreams of being buried alive, of clawing at coffin wood, of the taste of earth in his mouth. Then, one morning, we found him in the family cemetery, digging with his bare hands. He had excavated an empty grave, perfectly rectangular, exactly his size. I examined the woman's hands. Her fingers were raw, nails torn, dirt ground so deep into the wounds it had become part of the flesh. And the others? One by one, same symptoms. The dreams, then the compulsion to dig. We tried restraining them, but he gestured to torn leather straps on the bed frames. They possess unnatural strength when the fit takes them. Now they lie here, hour after hour, only rising when the moon is new. The new moon? That's in 2 nights. Matthias nodded gravely. "Yes, doctor. And each time, the graves they dig go deeper. Last month, Master Josiah's pit was 12 feet deep before we could pull him out. He fought us like a man possessed, screaming that they were calling him home. I moved from patient to patient, taking pulse rates, uniformly slow, almost death-like, examining pupils, non-responsive to light, testing reflexes, absent, except for a violent reaction when I pressed soil from my boots near their faces. They inhaled deeply, moaning. The youngest was a boy of perhaps 16, the eldest a man in his 60s. 3 women, for men. All Darrows by blood. Has anyone married into the family shown symptoms? I asked. There are no marriages outside the bloodline, Matthias said, then caught himself. That is, the Darrows are very selective. Before I could pursue this troubling statement, the woman I'd first examined suddenly spoke. Her voice was dry as dust, and she didn't move, didn't even shift her gaze from the ceiling. The door is opening, she said. Can you hear them scratching? They've been down there so long, waiting for us to come home. The first 7. The hungry ones. The ones who ate the earth to survive. The other 6 began to speak in unison. A horrible chorus. 7 above, 7 below. 7 to guard, 7 to grow. The soil remembers. The soil always remembers. Then, as suddenly as it began, they fell silent. I've seen men driven mad by syphilis, women broken by hysteria, children lost to fever dreams. But this was different. There was a terrible lucidity to their madness, as if they were seeing something the rest of us couldn't or wouldn't perceive. Tell me about the family history, I demanded. Everything. If I'm to help them, I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Matthias hesitated, glancing at the patients as if they might hear. Perhaps we should discuss this elsewhere, doctor. The walls here, they listen. He led me to the library, a vast room with shelves reaching to the ceiling, filled with volumes that looked ancient. Many were in languages I didn't recognize, symbols that hurt to look at directly. Matthias poured himself a brandy with shaking hands and offered me one. I accepted gladly. The Darrows came to Georgia in 1793, he began. 7 members of the family, fleeing something in the old country. Scotland, they said, though the records are deliberately vague. They purchased this land for almost nothing. The Creek Indians who lived here wouldn't set foot on it. Called it hungry ground. He took a deep drink before continuing. The family prospered unnaturally fast. Their crops grew even in drought. Their livestock multiplied beyond reason. But there were conditions. Always 7 family members, never more, never less. When one died, another was born within the month. When one was born, another would sicken and die. Perfect balance. That's impossible, I said, though even as I spoke, I remembered those 7 circles of disturbed earth outside. Is it? Matthias laughed bitterly. I've served this family for 40 years, Doctor. I've seen things that would drive a rational man mad. The ground here is wrong. It wants something, and every generation it tries to collect. What do you mean, collect? He was about to answer when a sound cut through the night. A scraping, grinding noise, like stone against stone, but coming from beneath us. The floor vibrated, and dust fell from the ceiling. The brandy in my glass rippled. It's starting early, Matthias whispered, face going pale. The new moon isn't for 2 days, but they're growing impatient. Doctor, I didn't summon you here to cure them. I summoned you to witness, to record. Someone needs to know what happened to the Darrow family. Someone needs to warn others to stay away from this cursed ground. That night I didn't sleep. How could I, with that grinding sound continuing beneath the house? I sat in my assigned room, a lavish chamber that in any other circumstances would have been comfortable, and tried to make sense of what I was experiencing. My medical training warred with what my eyes and ears were telling me. There had to be a rational explanation, mass hysteria perhaps, or some unknown disease affecting the mind. But then I looked out my window and saw them. The 7 circles of bare earth I'd noticed upon arrival were no longer empty. In each one, soil was moving, churning, as if being worked from below. No wind stirred the trees, no rain fell, yet the earth in those precise spots writhed like something alive. I grabbed my coat and medical bag, determined to investigate. The house was silent as I made my way downstairs, but it was the silence of held breath, of anticipation. Every portrait seemed to lean forward as I passed. Every shadow seemed to reach for me. Outside, the air was thick and cold, carrying a smell like an open tomb. I approached the nearest circle of disturbed earth, my lantern held high. The soil was indeed moving, bulging upward in places, sinking in others. I knelt and placed my hand on the ground. It was warm, feverishly so, and I could feel a rhythmic pulsing, like a heartbeat. You shouldn't be here. I spun around to find the youngest Darrow, the 16-year-old boy, standing behind me. He was barefoot, still in his nightclothes, and his eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire eye. Thomas, I ventured, remembering the name Matthias had mentioned. You should be in bed. You're ill. He tilted his head at an unnatural angle. Ill? No, doctor. We're going home. Can't you feel them calling? They've been down there since 1793, waiting. The first 7. The ones who made the bargain. What bargain? I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. 7 above, 7 below, he recited in a sing-song voice. They went down willing, to feed the ground, to make it rich. But the hunger grew. It always grows. And now it wants us back. All of us. To complete the circle. The ground beneath him began to crack, and he smiled. A terrible expression on such a young face. They're coming up as we go down. It's already started. Look. He pointed to the furthest circle of earth, and I raised my lantern. What I saw there still haunts me. A hand was emerging from the soil, not reaching up, but pushing up, as if someone was being birthed from the earth itself. The hand was wrong, though. Too long, fingers bent at too many joints, skin the color and texture of wet clay. I stumbled backward, and Thomas laughed. The first Darrows weren't fleeing something in Scotland, Doctor. They were bringing something with them. Something old. Something hungry. They thought they could control it, contain it to this land. They were wrong. The hand was followed by an arm, then a shoulder. The thing pulling itself from the earth might once have been human, but centuries underground had changed it into something else. Its face, when it finally emerged, was a nightmare of root-like tendrils where features should have been, with dark holes that might have been eyes. 6 more mounds began to birth similar horrors. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran back to the house, Thomas's laughter following me. But when I reached the door, the other 6 Darrows were standing there, blocking my way. They had risen from their beds, and they stood in a perfect line, their black eyes reflecting my lantern light. "Doctor," said Josiah, the eldest. His voice was layered, as if multiple people were speaking through him. "You were brought here to witness. The Darrow line ends tonight, but the bargain continues. 7 must go down so 7 can rise. It's been written in the soil since the first seed was planted." "This is madness," I said. "Let me help you. There must be a way to break this curse." "Curse?" The woman I'd first examined stepped forward. "This isn't a curse, Doctor. It's a contract, written in blood and bone and planted deep. Every prosperity has its price. Every harvest demands seed. We are the final crop." Behind me I could hear those things, the first 7, approaching the house. Their footsteps were wet and heavy, leaving trails of dark earth. The current Darrows moved past me, walking out to meet them. I wanted to stop them, but my body wouldn't move. Some force held me in place, making me watch. In the moonlight, the 2 groups of 7 faced each other, the living Darrows and the things that had once been Darrows. They stood motionless for a long moment, then began to walk toward each other. As they moved, the ground between them cracked and split, revealing a vast hollow beneath the estate. The earth was honeycombed with tunnels, passages that went down into darkness so complete my lantern light couldn't penetrate it. The 2 groups met at the edge of this chasm. The thing that had first emerged reached out with its root fingers and touched Josiah's face. He didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled and spoke. "We return what was borrowed. 7 for 7. The debt is paid." And then, together, all 14 of them stepped forward into the abyss. I stood frozen at that precipice for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The chasm that had opened in the earth was not simply a hole. It was a mouth, a throat, a passage to something that should never have existed beneath Georgia soil. The darkness within seemed to breathe, exhaling a cold that burned my skin and inhaling with a force that pulled at my clothes, my hair, my very soul. Matthias found me there, still paralyzed, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky crimson. He didn't seem surprised by the gaping maw in the earth or the absence of the family he'd served for 4 decades. "Come away, Doctor," he said quietly, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "It's not safe to look too long into the hungry dark. It might look back." He led me to the house, my legs moving mechanically. Inside, he poured me brandy with steady hands, though I noticed he didn't pour one for himself this time. "You knew," I accused, once I found my voice. "You knew what would happen." "I knew something would happen," he corrected. "The Darrows have been fighting this for 3 generations. Every new moon, the compulsion grew stronger. Every year, the things below grew more insistent. It was always going to end this way. What are those things? What's down there?" Matthias walked to the window, gazing out at the chasm. "The first Darrows didn't flee Scotland, Doctor. They were exiled. They'd found something ancient in the Scottish Highlands, something that promised prosperity in exchange for sacrifice. They thought they were clever, making a deal that specified 7 family members must tend the bargain. They thought it meant their line would never die out. But the thing they bargained with was older and cleverer than they imagined. It came with them, embedded in soil they brought from the old country. They planted it here in land already considered cursed by the natives. The 2 hungers merged, grew stronger. The bargain twisted. 7 above, 7 below, but which 7 and for how long? The first 7 Darrows who made the original compact went into the earth willingly in 1793, thinking they were sealing the deal. Instead, they became changed, transformed by what lives deeper still. I thought of those root-faced horrors, once human, twisted by centuries in that unholy soil. And now the bargain is fulfilled, but the hunger remains. The land is saturated with it. This house, these grounds, they'll need to be abandoned. Nothing will grow here properly again. Nothing clean, anyway. As if to emphasize his point, I looked out the window and saw that the grass around the chasm was already turning black, spreading outward like an infection. The trees nearest to the hole were wilting, their leaves falling in a rain of decay. "We should leave," I said. "Now." "Yes," Matthias agreed. "But first, there's something you need to see. The real reason I summoned you. You're a man of science, doctor, but also one who can accept what he sees with his own eyes. The world needs to know. The warning needs to be recorded." He led me back to the library, to a section I hadn't noticed before. Behind a false panel was a smaller room, its walls lined with journals. Hundreds of them dating back to 1793. Every generation of Darrows kept records, Matthias explained. Of the changes, the compulsions, the things they saw and heard. It's all here. The progressive corruption of their bloodline, their land, their souls. Take them. Study them. Make sure others know to stay away. I gathered as many journals as I could carry, stuffing them into my medical bag and pockets. As I did, I noticed that the most recent entry was dated just 3 days ago, in Josiah's hand. The dreams are constant now. We see the truth of what we are, not inheritors of a bargain, but the payment itself. We were grown like crops, tended and nurtured, made rich with privilege and prosperity, all to be harvested when ripe. 7 generations of Darrows, 7 souls per generation. 49 souls to feed something that should have stayed buried in the old country. But it's here now, rooted deep. We go to our fate knowing we were never anything more than food. Whoever finds this, burn the land. Salt the earth. Let nothing grow here again. A crash from outside interrupted my reading. Through the window, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The chasm was changing, closing, but not like a wound healing. More like a mouth swallowing. The edges were pulling inward, and things were emerging from the darkness before it sealed. Not the root-faced Darrows, but something else. Small things like seeds or spores, drifting on the wind. "We need to go now," Matthias said urgently. "It's spreading, seeding, looking for new ground to corrupt." We fled then, taking only the journals and my medical supplies. As we rode away, I looked back once and saw Willow Grove Mansion collapsing in on itself, pulled down by roots that had grown up through its foundation overnight. The entire structure folded like paper, disappearing into a sinkhole that hadn't existed moments before. But worse than the destruction was what I saw rising from the ruins. A cloud of those spore-like things, spreading outward on the morning breeze. Each one glowing faintly with a diseased light, each one carrying the potential for new corruption, new bargains, new hunger. We rode hard for 3 days, stopping only to rest the horses. Matthias had a destination in mind, a church in Savannah where he claimed the priest would know what to do. But by the second day, I knew we were already too late. The first sign was the birds. They were flying wrong, not in formation, but in perfect spirals, round and round, until they dropped from exhaustion. Then the trees along our path began to show symptoms. Their bark split open, revealing something black and viscous beneath, like blood but thicker. The smell was the same as in the Darrow house, grave earth and corruption. "It's moving faster than I expected," Matthias said, his composed demeanor finally cracking. "The spores, they're not just spreading the corruption. They're preparing the ground." "For what?" He didn't answer, but spurred his horse faster. That night, we stopped at a small settlement called Millbrook. It was a modest place, maybe 30 families, a general store, a tiny church. The kind of place that should have been bustling with evening activity. Instead, it was silent. We found the residents in the town square, all of them, standing in concentric circles around 7 freshly dug holes in the earth. Men, women, children, all staring down into these miniature graves with vacant expressions. Their eyes had that same black quality I'd seen in the Darrows. Good God, I breathed. An old woman turned to us, her movements mechanical. 7 above, 7 below, she said in a voice not her own. The tithe must be paid. The hunger must be fed. It's jumping, Matthias whispered in horror. The corruption, it's not just spreading physically. It's finding places where the barriers are thin, where desperation or greed or old sins have weakened the walls between what is and what shouldn't be. I dismounted and approached the woman, my medical instincts overriding my fear. Madam, can you hear me? Can you tell me your name? She tilted her head, and for a moment, I saw confusion in her eyes. The real woman fighting to surface. I'm Mary Connell. But I can feel them, doctor. Under the ground. They're so hungry. They've been hungry for so long. We have to feed them. 7 of us. It's only fair. No, I said firmly. You don't have to feed anything. This is a sickness, a corruption. Fight it. But even as I spoke, I felt it myself, a tugging at the edge of my consciousness. Whispers in a language that predated words. The ground beneath Millbrook was responding to those scattered spores, awakening to the same hunger that had consumed the Darrow estate. Matthias pulled me back. We can't save them, doctor. Once it takes hold, once they start digging, it's too late. We have to warn the others. The cities. The authorities. The authorities? I laughed bitterly. What do I tell them? That the ground itself has become carnivorous? That an ancient bargain is spreading like a plague? Tell them the truth, he said simply. Show them the journals. Some will believe. Enough to matter. We left Millbrook as the residents began to lower themselves into those holes. One by one, 7 of them chosen by some criteria I couldn't fathom. The others watched with empty eyes, and I heard them chanting as we rode away. 7 above, 7 below. The soil remembers. The soil always remembers. The next morning we discovered we were being followed. Not by people but by the corruption itself. Behind us the road was changing. The packed earth was loosening, becoming dark and rich like freshly turned grave soil. Plants along the roadside were twisting, their roots surfacing and reaching toward us like grasping fingers. It knows we have the journals, Matthias said. It knows we mean to warn others. The hunger has a kind of intelligence, doctor. Ancient and alien, but intelligent nonetheless. We reached Savannah by nightfall, but the city was already in chaos. Not from the corruption, not yet, but from refugees fleeing the outlying settlements. They told wild tales of the earth opening up, of friends and family walking into holes that appeared overnight, of crops growing backward into the soil. The priest Matthias sought, Father Miguel, was an old Spanish man who'd seen much in his years. He didn't dismiss our story. Instead, he led us to his church's basement, where he showed us records dating back centuries. Similar incidents in Spain, in Scotland, in Peru. Always the same pattern. 7 sacrifices, spreading corruption, the earth itself becoming hostile to human life. It's older than Christianity, he said. Older than any religion we know. It's the hunger that existed before life, angry that life dared to exist at all. The Darrows didn't make a bargain with it. They just gave it a foothold in a new land. Can it be stopped? I asked. Contained, perhaps. Never stopped. He pulled out maps, began marking. Fire sometimes works. Salt, consecrated ground resists it longer. But ultimately, it's about starving it. Denying it the 7 it needs to fully manifest in each new place. But even as we planned, I could feel it approaching. The spores we'd fled from had found other carriers, other vessels. The hunger was spreading not in a line but in a web, finding every place where human darkness had left a door ajar. By the 3rd day in Savannah, the situation had deteriorated beyond our worst fears. The corruption wasn't spreading linearly as we'd assumed. It was appearing simultaneously in dozens of locations, each connected by some invisible thread of malevolence. The pattern became clear when Father Miguel spread out his maps and marked each reported incident. Mother of God, he whispered. It's not random. Look. The points formed a shape, a 7-pointed star with Willow Grove at its center. Each point was exactly 7 miles from the next, and at each location, the same scene played out. 7 holes, 7 sacrifices, 7 witnesses left to spread the word of what they'd seen. It's not just feeding, Matthias said, his face pale. It's building something, a network, a web of corrupted ground. I was studying the Darrow journals, trying to find anything that might help, when I came across an entry from 1823 that chilled me to the bone. The thing below spoke to me in dreams last night. It showed me visions of the world remade. Every field a graveyard, every garden a mouth, the earth itself transformed into one vast consuming entity. It needs 7 times 7 times 7 locations to complete the transformation. 343 points of corruption, all activated simultaneously. The Darrows were just the first. We were the seed. God help me, we've doomed them all. 343, I said aloud. That's how many it needs. Father Miguel crossed himself. How many have been reported so far? We counted the marks on the map. 42 confirmed, with more reports coming in every hour. That night, the corruption reached Savannah proper. It started in the poorest quarter, where desperation and suffering had worn the spiritual defenses thin. I was there, trying to evacuate families when the ground began to move. Not violently, but with a horrible gentleness, like a mother cradling a child. 7 perfectly circular depressions formed in the main square, and the people nearest to them stopped mid-step, their eyes rolling back until only white showed. "The call?" one of them said in a voice like grinding stone. "Do you hear the call? 7 are chosen. 7 are blessed. 7 will go home." I tried to pull a young boy away from the edge of one of the forming pits, but the moment I touched him, I felt it, the full force of the hunger's attention. It was like looking into an abyss that looked back, that knew me, that whispered my name in voices that sounded like everyone I'd ever lost. "Dr. Blackwood," it said inside my mind, "you've seen the truth. You know the futility of resistance. Why struggle? Why not rest? The earth is patient. The earth is kind. The earth forgives all sins in the end." For a moment, I almost let go. The exhaustion of the past days, the horror of what I'd witnessed, the sheer hopelessness of fighting something so vast and ancient. It all crashed over me. It would be so easy to just step forward, to let the soil embrace me, to stop fighting. But then I heard screaming, not of fear, but of rage. Father Miguel had arrived with a group of priests and townspeople, all carrying torches and bags of salt. They formed a circle around the corrupted ground and began to pray, not in English but in a dozen languages: Latin, Spanish, Gullah, African tongues I didn't recognize. The diversity seemed to confuse the hunger, make it hesitate. "Fire and salt," Father Miguel shouted. "Burn the corrupted earth. Save who you can." What followed was chaos. We fought not against people but against the will of the ground itself. The earth tried to swallow our feet. Roots erupted to trip us, and always that voice whispered, promised, threatened. But we saved some. Not all. 7 still went into the ground that night, but we saved more than we lost. Among the journals, I found instructions for a ritual the Darrows had tried but never completed, a way to sever the connection between corrupted ground and the source. It required sacrifice, but not of life. Instead, it demanded memory, history, connection to place. To perform it meant erasing yourself from the land's memory, becoming a stranger to the earth itself. "I'll do it," Matthias said when I explained. "I have no family, no connections beyond the Darrows. If I can sever even 1 point of corruption, it might not work," I warned. "And if it does, you'll be untethered, unable to put down roots anywhere, ever again." He smiled sadly. "I've been untethered since I chose to serve that cursed family. At least this way, my drifting serves a purpose." We performed the ritual that night in the corrupted square. I won't detail the specifics. Some knowledge shouldn't be preserved. But I'll say this. Watching Matthias fade from the world's memory, seeing people who'd known him for years suddenly unable to recall his name, feeling my own memories of him becoming slippery and uncertain, it was almost worse than the corruption itself. But it worked. The 7 holes in that square sealed themselves, and the ground became just ground again. Dead and barren, but no longer hungry. "We need to teach others," Father Miguel said urgently. "If enough people perform the ritual, if enough connections are severed, we'd be creating a world of ghosts," I finished. "People without homes, without history, without connection to anything. Better than a world consumed," he replied. But even as we planned, I knew the truth. We were fighting a delaying action. The corruption had spread too far, taken root in too many places. For every point we severed, 3 more appeared. The geometric progression was inexorable. The journals revealed one final, terrible truth. The Darrows hadn't been the first to make such a bargain. Throughout history, in places of desperation or greed, families had made deals with the hunger below. The Darrows were just the first to bring it to America, to soil already prepared by other ancient wrongs. I write this now from a place I cannot name, in a time that feels disconnected from the flow of normal days. The corruption spread for 7 weeks before something changed, not an ending, but a transformation I struggle to describe. The number of corrupted sites had reached 336 when I made a terrible discovery in the last of the Darrow journals. Hidden in the binding of Josiah's final entry was a letter written in a language that hurt to read, but which somehow I understood. It was from the first Josiah Darrow, the one who'd made the original bargain in Scotland in 1761. "To whosoever finds this record," it began, "know that we were deceived not once but twice. The hunger below is real, ancient, and terrible, but it is not the true threat. It is merely the herald, the preparing of the way. When 343 points are corrupted, when the star is complete, something else will rise. Something that has slept beneath all earth since before the continents divided." The Darrows were not payment. We were the key. Our blood, spreading through the soil, awakening what should have slept forever. I shared this with Father Miguel and what remained of Matthias, for I could barely remember him now, the ritual having nearly erased him from reality. We had 7 days, maybe less, before the final sites were corrupted. There must be something, Father Miguel insisted, surrounded by every text on banishment and consecration his church possessed. Some way to prevent the awakening. But I had begun to understand something terrible. The corruption wasn't killing the land, it was changing it, preparing it. Every person who went into those holes, every sacrifice made, they weren't being destroyed. They were being incorporated, merged with something vast and incomprehensible. The earth itself was becoming conscious, aware, hungry not just for flesh but for experience, memory, soul. On the final night, when the 343rd site was corrupted, a small farm 7 miles from where Savannah used to stand, I felt the world shift. Not physically, though the ground did tremble. It was deeper than that. The very nature of reality bent, twisted, reformed. The sky turned the color of old blood. The sun, setting in the west, reversed its course and rose again. But wrong. Too large, too red, pulsing like a heart. And from every corrupted site, from every hole that had been dug, came a sound like the earth breathing. Then they emerged. Not the 7 Darrows, not the root-faced things, but the ones who had gone willing into the ground over the past weeks. They came up changed but not destroyed. Their eyes held depths of soil and time. Their skin bore patterns like geological strata, and when they spoke, it was in harmony with something vast. "The earth remembers," they said in unison, hundreds of voices from hundreds of locations. Every step, every death, every drop of blood. We fed it memories, experiences, consciousness. Now it wakes. Now it knows. Now it hungers not for death but for unity. I understood then. The true horror wasn't that the earth would consume us. It was that it wanted to absorb us, make us part of itself, create a new form of existence where the boundary between human and soil, consciousness and ground, dissolved entirely. Father Miguel fell to his knees, his faith shattered by the impossibility of it all. The thing that Matthias had become, a shadow of a man, barely remembered, simply faded away entirely, unable to maintain existence in this new reality. But I had touched the corruption. I had felt its hunger. And somehow, perhaps because I had studied it so intensely through the Darrow journals, I remained myself even as the world changed around me. The transformation wasn't instant. It took days, weeks, maybe longer. Time had become fluid. I watched as trees began to bleed sap that looked like blood, as rivers ran backward, as the dead rose not as undead but as something between life and death. The cities emptied as people walked willingly into the embrace of the transformed earth, their individual selves dissolving into something collective. I found myself at Willow Grove, or where it had been. The mansion was gone, but in its place stood something impossible. A tree made of architectural elements, growing rooms like fruit, its roots made of staircases descending into infinite darkness. The 7 original Darrows stood around it, no longer horrible but beautiful in an alien way. Their bodies merged partially with the tree, their faces serene. "Dr. Blackwood," Josiah said, and his voice was wind through leaves. "You witnessed. You recorded. You remembered. Now choose. Join the unity or remain apart, the last individual in a collective world." I looked around at the transformed landscape. Every blade of grass had an eye. Every stone pulsed with borrowed heartbeat. The air itself carried whispers of every conversation ever held above this ground. It was horrible. It was beautiful. It was the end of humanity as we knew it and the beginning of something else. "What are we becoming?" I asked. "What we always were," he replied. "Part of the earth. But now the earth is part of us too. Consciousness and matter united. The hunger satisfied by becoming one with what it hungered for." I could feel the pull, the promise of never being alone again, of sharing consciousness with billions, of understanding the deep secrets of the earth. But I could also feel what would be lost. Individuality, free will, the beautiful isolation of being a single soul in a vast universe. I made my choice. I remain apart. I alone, of all the humans who existed before the transformation, retain my individual consciousness. I walk through a world that is no longer mine, recording what I see, preserving the memory of what humanity was before it became something else. The transformed ones don't stop me. Perhaps they need a witness, a reminder of what they were. The earth no longer hungers, it is satisfied, glutted on human consciousness. But sometimes, in what passes for night in this new world, I hear it digesting, processing, becoming something even stranger. The Darrow family's graves did indeed dig themselves, not to bury the dead, but to birth a new form of existence. I write this as a warning and a record. If somehow this account reaches another world, another time where humanity still exists as individuals, know this: the earth remembers everything. Every cruelty, every kindness, every drop of blood spilled upon it. And sometimes, when enough blood has been spilled, when enough bargains have been made, when enough darkness has soaked into the soil, it wakes up. And when it wakes, it is hungry. But not for death, for unity, for consciousness, for the dissolution of all boundaries. The Darrows thought they were making a bargain for prosperity. Instead, they were planting seeds for the transformation of the world itself. I am Dr. Cornelius Blackwood. I am the last individual human on an earth that has become something else. And every day, the pull to join the collective grows stronger. One day I will succumb. And when I do, when the last individual consciousness merges with the whole, what will the earth become then? I suspect I already know. I can feel it in the way the transformed ones move, in the patterns they make, in the way reality bends around them. They're preparing for something else, something bigger. The earth was just the beginning. The hunger, you see, is infinite. And now it has 7 billion souls to feed it, to direct it, to spread it. The stars look different now, hungrier. The Darrow family's legacy isn't just the transformation of Earth. It's the beginning of something that will spread, world to world, star to star, until all of existence is united in one vast, conscious, hungry whole. 7 above, 7 below. The soil remembers. The soil always remembers. And now, God help us all, the soil thinks. The soil plans. The soil reaches for the stars.